I'm going to deliver this in 4 acts with a brief technical intermission. Sometimes blockchain talks can be very boring, pretty stale, very technical, so I'm going to try to make it a bit more exciting. For Act 1, I want to jump to a case study now. The subject of today's talk is blockchain for all or blockchain for good. Is it possible? And I wanted to start with a scene that some of you may be familiar with, I am intimately familiar with, and that is the Syrian civil war. So you're like, is this a political talk? We have to understand politics to understand the importance of blockchain. And so in Syria, they have been experiencing 7 years of civil war. 11 million have been displaced and 6 million remain in Syria but still displaced. And 48% of those that have been affected by the civil war are children. Now, what does blockchain have to do with Syria? What does tech and innovation have to do with Syria? Well, that enters Hala Systems. So I work for ConsenSys, which is one of the largest blockchain companies in the world. We build applications on top of the Ethereum blockchain. We were started by one of the co-founders of Ethereum. And I specifically work on ConsenSys Social Impact, which is part of our consultancy group. And so what we do is we spend all day thinking about how to use blockchain to help save the world. And one of our clients is Hala Systems. Now, Hala is an existing tech company, and they're a small team. You can see a lot more about them online. They went out of stealth mode about a month ago. But they use IoT sensors and civilian observations, including those of the White Helmets, which is a pretty famous civil defense group in Syria, to actually predict when a bombing is going to happen in Syria. So with the ground sensors that they have, they detect flyovers by planes, and their sensors are so smart that they can actually detect the make and model of the plane, and therefore attribute what country it's coming from. They were part of a finding that a Russian plane happened to bomb a neighborhood in Syria, and they came to us wondering how we could use blockchain. And so with Hala Systems, we designed a project that makes their data immutable. So when they go to the International Criminal Court or to the UN, there are many observatories set up around Syria. There is proof that their data is actually permanent, because what happens often in a lot of these trials is that the Russians or the Syrians or other actors claim that if your data is on your server, you made it up, you falsified it, how can they know it's true? And so with Hala, we created a second layer of immutable proof utilizing a blockchain. So that is a really exciting project that we debuted a few months ago. Now, Act 2 is scaling back out quite a bit. And so we are going to look at the state of the world. So despite me starting with Syria, which is a pretty dark subject, things are actually getting better. There have been quite a few surveys that have been done showing that people think the world is getting worse, when actually it's getting a lot better due to large global initiatives, such as the Millennium Development Goals or now the Sustainable Development Goals. For example, literacy rates have more than doubled in the past 50 years globally, which is pretty exciting. We have a net reduction of poverty. So the rate of poverty, or the technical level, is $1.90 USD a day. That means that you're in extreme poverty. And that number has dropped to only about 10% around the world now, which is pretty exciting. That might not be something that the news talks about too frequently, but the world is getting better. We are also globally connected. So right now in the world, there are actually 7.7 billion mobile phone subscriptions, which is pretty exciting. I don't know if too many people, especially coming from the tech world, I find that people don't know that mobile phone penetration rates are that high in what some consider emerging markets. I personally come from a background of international development and global health, so that's pretty familiar for me in the fieldwork that I've done. But in switching over to tech, a lot of people think that the emerging market or the developing economy are pretty disconnected, but that's actually not true. And what's exciting when that we're globally connected is that borders are falling. So we're able to know a lot more about things like Syria or like South Sudan or like Venezuela because we are connected and because we have access to that information. And we also have really great things like innovative service delivery. So for example, there's a company called Zipline that delivers blood plasma transfusions in Rwanda. And they actually attribute for more than 20% of the blood plasma movement outside of Kigali, which is the capital of Rwanda, and that's pretty exciting. And I was reading over some of the innovators today. Obviously, you guys are doing incredible things, so I could list you all up here as well. So things are getting better, and tech is playing a huge role in that change and that development. However, something is still wrong. Technology, as we've seen with things like the Equifax hack or like Facebook, technology is a bit tone deaf, we could say. Those who are creating tech, those who are coming out of Silicon Valley, I personally live in New York, which is now kind of the blockchain hub of the world. They're pretty disconnected from the people, from the problems. We like to say in tech, and those of us that work in tech that are trying to make it a little bit better, is that tech doesn't look like those who are using it. Those who are building it are typically what you can think of. I don't know if you've ever seen the show Silicon Valley on HBO, but it's a pretty funny, yeah, some laughs. It's a pretty funny show where everyone just kind of wears hoodies, walks around, drinks Soylent, and codes all day, and really never steps out of their office. And this scene, yes, it is a stock photo, but I work for a tech company, and it's not too far away from reality. And what you get oftentimes are brilliant people that have actually never experienced the problem that they're trying to solve, which is quite harmful and quite dangerous. And what we get, like I mentioned, things like Equifax or things like Facebook, Facebook is really interesting. So Sheryl Sandberg, in an interview a few months ago after the Cambridge Analytica scandal, said that, and I quote, "We were too optimistic. We didn't think enough about the use cases and the negative implications." Now, if Sheryl Sandberg, the COO of Facebook, isn't thinking about the negative implications of what is now a global platform, who is? I would say people in this room. I would say people like my team, but that's not enough. So, brief intermission. And I'm going to pause and talk a little bit about blockchain, which may be boring for some. I tried to make it not super technical. But I want to make sure we're all level set, because blockchain is the lens through which we will continue the rest of this conversation. So, what is a blockchain? A blockchain is a database. Some people think blockchain is quite confusing, but really it's a way of keeping record of transactions, of information, of movement, and it's inherently resistant to attacks and to fraud. So the three kind of key components of a blockchain are immutability, which just means that it's permanent. So in a blockchain, once you've entered something in and it has been, a consensus has been reached and it has been approved, you can't edit or delete it, which is pretty awesome. It's decentralized, so I gave the example of Equifax. So Equifax was an example of a centralized attack, meaning that the database, there was a single database that was attacked and data was able to be extracted. However, with a decentralized database, what this means is that all of the computers, we call them nodes in blockchain language, keep the same information, they keep the same record, and they're always constantly being updated. And in order to change or to attack, depending upon the consensus mechanism, you either have to have several $1 billion or you have to orchestrate a pretty concerted collaboration to coordinate an attack. And then it's cryptographically secure. So all of blockchain is really just components that have existed, right? So cryptography, really enhanced math, isn't new. And with a blockchain, which was introduced in 2008 with Bitcoin, cryptography is the key that keeps it that secure. So when we say inherently resistant to attacks and fraud, that is why. So why is it so revolutionary? I was at Davos in January, and blockchain was the most frequently used word for the entire event. So Davos is the World Economic Forum's annual gathering of leaders. And I've been at South by Southwest, it was the same thing. South by Southwest has actually just introduced an entire blockchain track for next year. Everyone is talking about blockchain. Not many people know why or what it is, but they know that they want it. We often have people come to us. We have UN agencies come to us and they say, we need a blockchain. And we're like, great, why? Someone told us that it's going to fix everything. Not true. It can fix some things, but not everything. But a blockchain is revolutionary really as I mentioned, the difference between centralized and decentralized. And this is the physical components, right? So this is actually how the data is stored. But really with blockchain, and one of the key reasons I got involved was the mentality and the ethos of decentralization. So with centralization, what we have is a single source of truth. We have someone who says, this is what reality is, and this is how to operate, and everyone else just kind of says, okay, they follow the rules, they go along with it. It's an intermediary who may charge a fee. But with decentralization and with distributed governance, what you actually get is that different people that are part of the network get to define how the network operates. And so with decentralization, you actually enhance participatory governance, participatory economies, because people get to choose how they interact with one another. And this is kind of challenging for some, because we rely on governments, and we rely on banks, and we rely on things like Uber or Airbnb. We trust them to take care of the logistics of running things for us. But really, what we get with a blockchain is an opportunity to design new systems for operating and engaging, in which we define the rules. And so it also has a move towards scalability, resilience, efficiency, cost reduction, stability. Those are all the business terms we like to use with clients. But really, I think what's exciting is, like I said, the ethos of blockchain and what it means for people. And I also wanted to briefly touch on the difference between blockchain and cryptocurrency, because I've found in my work that the people often conflate the two concepts, and they're not the same. They are related. So blockchain was introduced in 2008 in the Bitcoin white paper. So the Bitcoin white paper appeared on the internet conveniently right after the 2008 financial crisis. It was not a coincidence. If you read the Bitcoin white paper, which white paper just means like technical paper, Bitcoin was designed to be a currency that did not rely on a centralized system, such as a bank, because as we saw in the 2008 financial crisis, what a bank did, what certain bankers did, was that they changed the source of truth, leading to a global collapse. Now, with Bitcoin, it was a way that a computer, a program, a software, designed a currency. It released a currency. There's a finite amount. You can't change the protocol. No single person can alter it. It went public. Now, blockchain is the mechanism by which people were granted Bitcoins. So you can have a blockchain without a cryptocurrency, such as Bitcoin, but you cannot have Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies without a blockchain. And so Bitcoin was designed actually, fun fact, to be an incentive mechanism for people to maintain the records of the ledger. So if we go back, it's a database, so it keeps track, it keeps record. Who knows what? You can decide what information you want to track. But as we heard, someone was talking about the amount of energy it takes to run these systems. It's pretty onerous to continue to update computers, thousands of computers around the world. It takes a lot of energy. Computers are literally just running 24/7 and mining farms that looks a lot like Google's data servers. And Bitcoin was actually designed as the incentive mechanism. So Satoshi Nakamoto, a person, a group of people, we don't know still who created it, designed Bitcoin as a way to incentivize miners, to incentivize coders to keep their computers running constantly because of the energy consumption. So they received a Bitcoin. And then with that Bitcoin, they could do whatever they wanted with it. So anyone can actually make a cryptocurrency. Fun fact, it doesn't take that much. There are different standards. But what we like to talk about within ConsenSys and ConsenSys Social Impact is that you want to create a cryptocurrency that has an inherent utility to the platform that you're designing. So Bitcoin was designed to be a currency, not a pure investment piece, which might be why the prices have been so volatile. The same thing with Ether. So Ether is the native cryptocurrency for Ethereum, which is the platform that we built on top of at ConsenSys. And its inherent utility is in the fact that you cannot process a transaction without paying a gas fee. Again, the fee that it takes to use the internet, to use the energy. So you have to pay with Ether. And so that's the native value of Ether to Ethereum. So we've covered what blockchain is. That was very, very brief. I had to cut down a lot of technical slides. If you want more information on the technicalities of it, you can find me after. But we will jump back into Act 3, which are use cases. So these are the really exciting things. So I'm going to speak about a few of the things that we're working on with my team, and then some industries that I think are ripe for disruption that perhaps we can all brainstorm on together. So our first case study is a client called Luxarity. I actually just got back from Hong Kong 3 days ago, and then came to New York and then came here. But Luxarity is the social enterprise venture of Lane Crawford Joyce Group, which is one of the largest luxury retailers in Asia. And their business model is that people donate luxury items, and then they sell the luxury items in a pop-up, and then the money that is raised goes to charity. So Luxarity came to us and said, we want to create a transparent donation tool where our donors, once they purchase their items, can actually pick where the money goes, and they can follow it along the supply chain or the life cycle of their donation. And so we spent a few months designing a tool, and we debuted it last week, again, like I said, in Hong Kong, which was quite exciting. But what we did is that we created an NFT, or a non-fungible token, but we created a digital asset, a version of the donation. So say that you bought $500 worth of goods, you then would receive a unique pin. You would go into a platform, you could allocate where the money goes across their causes, and then once that money has moved from the Luxarity bank account to Parsons or to SCAD, which are design schools, you would then get notification. So you're seeing where your money goes. In the charity world, this is pretty revolutionary because often we don't actually know where the money goes. Going back to centralized systems, you have to rely on the charity. You have to trust them to believe that they're delivering the money. And there have been scandals in which we've seen people have been a bit untrustworthy and have abused funds. So we're excited about that case study. The second is the World Wildlife Fund. So this is our second project with the World Wildlife Fund. The first was with Viant, which is a blockchain supply chain tool tracking tuna in Fiji. And so there's, really quickly, there's rampant human rights abuses in tuna fishing in Fiji and in other parts of Southeast Asia. And so what we did was we placed an RFID tag on tuna, and then as it moved along, we joke it's from bait to plate, as it moves along the life cycle, the supply chain, you're able to scan a QR code and see whether or not the tuna that you're eating or the tuna that you collected is actually the tuna that they said they delivered to you. But another thing that we've been working on with the World Wildlife Fund is actually something called a token curated registry, or a TCR, more blockchain jargon. But you can think of it as Yelp. So you upvote, however, and instead of just upvoting, you have to actually stake a certain amount of tokens or cryptocurrency that is native to the platform. So what we found with the World Wildlife Fund is that there are tons of small-scale projects ripe for investment by impact investors such as the World Wildlife Fund or their partner networks. However, they don't have great visibility because they don't come from an organization that has a famous name, or they are at, they're below a threshold that many impact investors seek. And so what we built with the World Wildlife Fund is a way for renowned impact investors to go in and upvote and create a curated, vetted list of small projects that then they can pass along to other impact investors, hopefully increasing their visibility. And a last case study that I will discuss is Project Bifrost, which is actually a partnership between ConsenSys, MakerDAO, who created the stablecoin DAI. So stablecoin meaning it has remained stable at one DAI equals $1 US, which is pretty revolutionary when it comes to cryptocurrencies. Simpo and Ether, which these are all blockchain companies. But what we designed was a rapid cash-based transfer program. So we had a case study where we had a client who was in the Middle East, and to get their money from a foundation in the States or in Canada, it had to go through at least 7 banks, maybe Western Union, maybe PayPal, and the amount of money that they ended up getting at the end of the process was about 70% of the initial donation. So they lost about 30% in transaction fees by banks or by intermediaries such as Western Union or PayPal. And so we designed a closed loop system using a cryptocurrency, DAI, where people can actually get the full amount of their money quickly, and we could place the burden of cashing out that cryptocurrency onto a cash-heavy organization such as the Red Cross or other large independent and international NGOs. And so in terms of things that are ripe for opportunity, smart cities. So things like IoT are perfect enablers of blockchain because a blockchain is only as powerful as the information and the data that you put into it. So blockchain is just a database. So we like to say trash in, trash out. If you put in false information into a blockchain, the blockchain is not magic. It does not make it true. If you have poor quality data or data that actually isn't that dynamic, such as just basic Excel data, it might not do too much. However, if you have sensors, such as in the HOLA Systems example, or in plenty of smart cities that are popping up around the world, you can actually start to plug and play. And so one thing that we're seeing in emerging markets is that cities and the rapid rise of urbanization have an intense need for infrastructure and for smart infrastructure. And a lot of these countries have already leapfrogged things like 5G, et cetera, and mobile payments. And so why not with smart cities? And so, for example, a feature of the Ethereum blockchain is something called smart contracts. You can think of it like direct deposit, where you say on the 15th of November, today, I got paid. My bank knows that. However, with a smart contract, you plug in two systems into the blockchain, and funds are immediately released, or information can be immediately released. So think about all the different ways that you could design cities, where you say, if 1,000 cars pass X threshold, a certain amount of money is released to the federal, Transportation Regulation Committee. I just made that up. But you can think and start to brainstorm around ways you can plug in data. With renewable energy, blockchains are really great for coordination because with a distributed system, you can bring together parties that may not want to share all of the information. With a blockchain, you can program who has access to what information, but it provides for really enhanced coordination. So things like decreasing, the carbon footprint, it involves quite a few different parties that may have different goals and different agendas, but you can use blockchains to not only track outputs of emissions, but actually contributions to things like carbon credits. And so it is a great opportunity for increasing our usage of renewable energy. Supply chain. I like to think of supply chain as the lowest hanging fruit for blockchains and for blockchains using smart contracts, because with information, with payments, with identification, everything we do is a supply chain. So something moves from point A to point B. We rely on a bank to move our money from point A to point B, or our ID says that I moved from New York to Houston to Guadalajara. That's supply chain information. They're keeping track of my movements. And so with a supply chain, if you have a smart database and you have things like smart contracts, you can begin to automate the movement and the results of those supply chains. So I could say that if I'm working on a food delivery program, that the funds for that food delivery program in rural, again, we'll bring up Uganda, won't get released until the exact weight of the food that was guaranteed at the beginning of the negotiation arrives. The scale would denote the weight, and then that weight would be registered to a blockchain. If it meets the parameters that have then been programmed into the smart contract, the funds will be released. If not, the funds don't get released. So what you can start to see is a lot of the back office operations or the overhead cost affiliated with ensuring that what someone said or did is true, or what was agreed upon, can actually be automated using blockchains. Supply chain is also interesting because if you think about things like identification, if you think about refugees, if you think about human trafficking or sex trafficking, all of these things involve the movement of people. And so there's a lot of opportunity, but there is also a lot of caution when you start to create databases and registries of people and of their movements and of their identities. That starts to get quite familiar to some previous atrocities in our world. So it's something where we have to be quite careful around the ethics of what data we are storing on the blockchain or off the blockchain. And then empowerment. So as I mentioned, the ethos of blockchain is what's exciting. The fact that people can decide how to govern themselves is really what motivates me to get up in the morning. But with things like voting, you could start to use a blockchain to increase accountability and increase transparency. So the citizens of a community could say, this is how we vote. And then they can actually, if their leaders are down, or if their leaders are wanting to be a part of it, the people can begin to take power because they determine the parameters of the system. You can also see things like education applications. So if a community can define how they think education should be verified or validated, if they want to create new certificates, you can do that. And then you can release new credentials via a blockchain. So that's really exciting. And for the finale, Act 4, and my last 4 minutes, wanted to leave with a couple key things. So as we've seen today, the impossible is possible with the presentations that happened this morning, the presentations that are going to happen this afternoon. Open up MIT Tech Review, the future is now. People 70 years ago could never have anticipated the kind of technological innovations that we have today. And so, as I mentioned, those surveys show that people think the world is getting worse. It's actually getting better. So be optimistic, but be a little cautious. Something I like to talk about is that design must be inclusive. So when we're designing the systems, and I mentioned earlier the fact that those who are creating the tech don't look like those who are using it, it's because tech has been quite inaccessible. However, something with blockchain is that open source is like a key fundamental, it's a key standard in blockchain development. So nearly all of the applications, you can go on GitHub and actually see their code. And what that means is that anyone can begin developing applications, can begin building their own blockchains, which has been different than other tech innovations before, right? You don't have to go to a VC. You can do things like an ICO or initial coin offering. You can raise money on your own. However, when we're designing, one thing I would say that Tech for Good has been wrong for in the past has been exporting solutions. So when we're designing systems for people in, let's say, Egypt, which I was in a few months ago, go to Egypt and design with those people, or better yet, give them the tools that they need, have them start building the solutions themselves. And last but not least, it's up to us to decide the future of this technology. Blockchain has gotten a decently bad rap in the past year or two due to different scams and due to it's starting to, again, look a lot like Silicon Valley. And so rather than critiquing it or writing it off, which I've heard a lot of people do, they attribute bad projects and bad implementations to the technology itself. Really, it's up to us to decide what the design and future of blockchain is. And so with the few use cases I presented today, and then thinking about the applications and projects that are going to be discussed this afternoon, there are plenty of opportunities for us to actually create blockchain for all. So thank you.